The note was still warm when Dr. Chen pressed it into my palm, his fingers trembling just enough that I noticed, and when I looked up at his face, I saw something I'd never seen in the 12 years he'd been my physician. Genuine fear, the kind that makes your stomach drop because you know someone's about to tell you something that will change everything. And his voice, when he finally spoke, was barely above a whisper. "Vivian, don't go home tonight. Please, just trust me on this." And I stood there in that sterile examination room with its humming fluorescent lights and the faint smell of antiseptic, holding this crumpled piece of paper and trying to understand why my doctor, this calm professional man who'd seen me through pneumonia and a broken wrist and countless flu shots, looked like he'd just witnessed something terrible. Before I dive in, let me know in the comments where you're watching from, and if you enjoy stories like this, please like and subscribe. It helps me keep sharing more. My hands were shaking as I unfolded the note right there in front of him, but he shook his head quickly and said, "Not here. Read it when you're safe. Somewhere public." And that word, safe, it hung in the air between us like smoke, and I wanted to laugh because what could possibly be unsafe about my own home, the 3-bedroom house on Maple Street where I'd lived for 32 years, where I raised my daughter Patricia after my husband died. But Dr. Chen wasn't laughing. He was checking the hallway through the small window in the door like he expected someone to burst in at any moment. He glanced at the door again, then back at me. And I could see him weighing something in his mind, deciding how much to say. And finally he spoke in a voice so low I had to lean in to hear him. "Your daughter came to see me 3 days ago. She brought her husband Thomas with her, and they asked me questions. Vivian, questions about your mental state, about whether I thought you were capable of managing your own affairs, about whether I would be willing to sign documents stating that you needed full-time care." And each word hit me like a physical blow, like someone was systematically dismantling the foundation of my world, brick by brick. I stepped back, nearly stumbling over the examination table, and Dr. Chen reached out to steady me, but I pulled away because I needed space to process what he'd just said. And I heard myself say, "That's impossible. Patricia would never. She's my daughter. She loves me." And even as the words left my mouth, I could hear how naive they sounded. Dr. Chen's expression shifted to something that looked like pity mixed with frustration, and he said, "I told them no. I told them you're in excellent health both physically and mentally." And that's when things got uncomfortable. Thomas started talking about getting a second opinion, about finding a doctor who would understand the situation better, and Patricia just sat there with this cold look on her face and said, "We'll find someone more cooperative." The fluorescent lights seemed too bright suddenly, and Dr. Chen handed me a tissue, and I hadn't even realized I was crying, and he said, "I don't know their full plan, but I know enough to worry. I know they asked about your property, about your retirement accounts, and when I refused to cooperate, they left angry. But Thomas made a phone call in the waiting room. I heard him through the door, and he said something about moving to Plan B, about not needing my cooperation after all." I pressed the note against my chest and asked the question I was most afraid to hear answered. "What do you think they're going to do?" And Dr. Chen was quiet for a long moment before he said, "I think they're going to try to have you declared incompetent without my help, manufacture evidence of mental decline, stage situations where you look confused or unstable, maybe even tamper with your medications, and once they have enough documentation, they'll petition for guardianship, and everything you own becomes theirs to control." The room tilted slightly, and I had to grip the edge of the examination table. And somewhere in the back of my mind, I was thinking about all the little things I'd dismissed over the past few weeks. Patricia's sudden interest in my finances, her insistence on accompanying me to the bank, Thomas's questions about my will, the way they both exchanged glances when I forgot where I'd put my reading glasses, and I'd thought it was just love. just family looking out for each other. But now I saw it for what it really was. Reconnaissance, preparation, the careful construction of a narrative. "Read the note," Dr. Chen said, guiding me toward the door. "Read it somewhere safe, somewhere with witnesses, and then decide what you're going to do. But Vivian, please, don't go home alone tonight. Don't give them the opportunity they're waiting for." I left through the back entrance, and as I walked to my car, I kept expecting Patricia or Thomas to appear, but the garage was empty except for the echo of my footsteps. I sat in my car for 10 minutes before I trusted myself to drive, the note still clutched in my hand, and I realized I had absolutely no idea where I was going. The coffee shop I finally chose was one I'd never been to before, a small place called the Daily Grind near the university, full of students hunched over laptops, and I ordered a tea I didn't want just to have a reason to sit at one of the small tables near the window where I could watch the street. I unfolded the note slowly, and Dr. Chen's handwriting was small and precise, every letter carefully formed, and I could imagine him writing this late at night, knowing that what he was about to do could destroy his career, but doing it anyway. The note read, "Vivian, if you're reading this, then I've given you the warning I should have given you 3 days ago. I've done my research and consulted with colleagues who specialize in elder abuse cases, and everything points to a deliberate scheme. Patricia has already contacted 4 other doctors asking similar questions, and one of them, Dr. Richard Hayes, has agreed to evaluate you. He's known as someone who will provide convenient diagnoses for the right price, and your appointment with him is scheduled for this Friday at 2, though you were never told about it. They're planning to bring you in under false pretenses and conduct an evaluation designed to make you appear confused and incompetent. This report will be the foundation for their guardianship petition. They've already hired an attorney named Gregory Walsh who specializes in guardianship cases, and they've prepared affidavits from neighbors. Though when I called one of these neighbors, she had no idea what I was talking about, which means they're forging signatures. My advice is this: do not go home. Not until you've secured your own legal representation. Go to a hotel using cash. And first thing tomorrow, contact an attorney who specializes in elder law. I've included the name and number of someone I trust at the bottom of this note. Please take this seriously. I've seen cases like this before, and they all start the same way. And Vivian, family is only sacred when both sides honor that bond. And your daughter stopped honoring it the moment she decided your value was in what you owned rather than who you are." I must have read the note 5 times, and each time the words seemed to cut deeper, and around me the coffee shop continued its normal rhythm while my entire world was being dismantled. The attorney's name at the bottom was Miriam Foster, and I stared at those digits like they were a lifeline, and even as I reached for my phone, I felt doubt crash over me, because what if Dr. Chen was wrong? But then I remembered his fear, the details he'd provided, and I knew it was real. I dialed Miriam Foster's number with numb fingers, and a woman's voice answered, "Foster Law, this is Miriam speaking." And I opened my mouth, but nothing came out at first because saying the words would make this real. And finally, I forced myself to speak. "My name is Vivian Hartley. Dr. Nathan Chen gave me your number. He said you specialize in cases where family members are..." But I couldn't finish. Miriam's voice shifted immediately, becoming warmer but focused. "Dr. Chen is a good man, and he doesn't give out my number unless the situation is serious. Can you tell me what's going on? Take your time. I'm listening." And something about her tone made my throat close up, and suddenly I was crying. Not quiet tears, but full-body sobs. I managed to choke out the story in pieces, and Miriam listened without interrupting. And when I finally ran out of words, she was quiet for a moment before asking, "Where are you right now? Are you somewhere safe?" And I told her about the coffee shop, and she said, "Stay exactly where you are. I'm going to come to you. We can't waste time because if they're as far along as Dr. Chen suggests, then we're already behind. Text me the address, and I'll be there in 20 minutes. Those 20 minutes felt like hours, and I sat nursing cold tea and trying not to think about what was happening at my house, whether Patricia had noticed I wasn't home yet. A woman in her mid-40s walked through the door exactly 19 minutes later, steel gray hair cut in a practical bob and sharp dark eyes that assessed everything. And she crossed the shop and sat down across from me without preamble, pulling out a legal pad and pen and saying, "Tell me everything again, from the beginning, and include every detail because the small details are often what save us." So I told her everything. Starting from 6 months ago when Patricia's business had failed and I'd offered them the second floor of my house, thinking I was helping family, never imagining that generosity could be repackaged as weakness. Miriam wrote notes as I talked, occasionally stopping to ask clarifying questions. When did they move in exactly? And, did you charge them rent? And, have they had access to your financial documents? And each question revealed vulnerability I hadn't recognized. "The flowers stopped about 2 months ago," I said suddenly. "Patricia used to bring me fresh flowers every Sunday, but she hasn't done that since March. And now I'm wondering if that was when they made their decision, when they stopped pretending to care and started seeing me as an obstacle." Miriam looked up from her notes, and her expression was both kind and fierce. "Vivian, what's happening to you is not uncommon. I handle 3 or 4 cases like this every year, and they always follow similar patterns. First they isolate you, then they question your competence, then they move in for the kill with legal documents. And by the time most victims realize what's happening, it's too late, because the court has already appointed them as guardians." She reached across the table and took my hand. "But we're not going to let that happen to you. Because Dr. Chen got to you in time. And because you listened to him, however. I need you to understand that what comes next is going to be hard. It's going to require you to accept painful truths about your daughter, and it's going to require actions that might feel like betrayal. Even though they're self-preservation, can you do that?" I wanted to say yes immediately. But the truth was complicated because Patricia was still my daughter, still the toddler who'd cried in my arms, still the teenager who'd confided her heartbreak. And how do you reconcile those memories with the knowledge that the same person is now trying to destroy you? "I don't know if I can," I admitted. "But I don't know if I have a choice either, because doing nothing means letting her win, and I didn't survive 73 years just to give up now." Miriam smiled. "That's exactly the attitude we need. Now here's what's happening. First thing tomorrow we're filing for an emergency protective order freezing all your assets. We're filing a preemptive brief requesting that any guardianship petition be flagged as potentially fraudulent. Then we're arranging for you to be evaluated by an independent psychiatrist who can document that you are fully competent. And finally, we're gathering evidence of Patricia's scheme." The scope made my head spin, and I asked about cost, and Miriam said, "My retainer is $5,000, but I don't take these cases for the money. I take them because elder abuse is one of the most insidious crimes in our society. If you're worried about affording my services, don't be. We'll figure it out." I pulled out my checkbook and wrote $5,000 with hands that had finally stopped shaking, because now I was doing something, taking action instead of reacting. And when I handed the check to Miriam, she tucked it into her briefcase and pulled out documents. "I need you to sign these. They're engagement letters giving me permission to represent you. Read carefully and ask questions." I read through slowly, my mind catching on phrases like emergency intervention and contested guardianship, each phrase a small hammer blow reminding me this was real. And when I reached the bottom, I signed with a flourish that felt defiant. "Where are you staying tonight?" Miriam asked, and I realized I hadn't thought that far ahead, and she said, "I have a colleague who runs a small bed and breakfast. It's not advertised publicly, so Patricia won't find you there. I'll call ahead, and tomorrow I'll pick you up at 8, and we'll go straight to the courthouse." The bed and breakfast was called Willow Haven, at the end of a tree-lined street that felt like a different century. And when I pulled in, I saw a woman about my age on the porch who waved and walked down to meet me. "You must be Vivian," she said warmly. "I'm June. Miriam called. Come in. I've prepared the blue room for you." And her kindness, the easy welcome without questions, made me realize how starved I'd been for simple human compassion. The blue room overlooked a small garden where roses were beginning to bloom, and June brought chamomile tea and homemade cookies and said, "I'm downstairs if you need anything. I've worked with Miriam for 10 years, and I've seen a lot of women who needed a safe space to catch their breath, so please don't feel like you're imposing. Just rest." After she left, I sat on the bed and looked around this stranger's room that was now my refuge, and I thought about my own bedroom back at Maple Street. The photos of Patricia at various ages smiling and looking like she loved me, and I wondered if I'd ever go back, or if that life was over now. Sleep came in fragments that night, brief periods interrupted by dreams where Patricia's face shifted between the loving daughter I remembered and a stranger. And each time I jolted awake, I'd have confusion about where I was before memory came flooding back. At 7, June knocked with a breakfast tray, and she said, "Miriam called. She'll be here at 8 sharp. She said you'll need your strength today." And I ate mechanically, tasting nothing. Miriam arrived exactly on time, crisp and professional in a charcoal suit, and she reviewed strategy as we drove. "We're filing 3 motions: the protective order, the request for evaluation, and the motion to block any guardianship petition. The judge we drew is Constance Murphy. She's fair but tough and has particular dislike for adult children who manipulate the system. But Vivian, once we file these papers, there's no going back. Patricia will know, and the relationship you had will be permanently altered. Are you ready for that finality?" I looked out at familiar streets I'd driven past thousands of times, and I thought about all the years invested in Patricia, all the sacrifices and moments that made up our relationship. And I knew filing these papers would destroy whatever foundation still existed. But Patricia had already made her choice, and my filing first wasn't starting the war. It was refusing to be a passive victim. "I'm ready," I said, my voice steady. The courthouse was imposing, all gray stone and tall windows, and Miriam navigated hallways with confidence, steering me through security and elevators, and finally into offices where clerks shuffled papers, and she handed our filings to a woman who barely glanced before assigning a case number and telling us to wait. We sat on a hard wooden bench, and other people streamed past, lawyers in expensive suits, and families in best clothes, and defendants in handcuffs, and I felt completely out of place. Judge Murphy's assistant called us after 40 minutes, and the judge herself was a woman in her early 60s, with gray hair pulled back severely and reading glasses perched on her nose, and she looked up from our filings with an expression hard to read. "Ms. Foster, these are serious allegations: elder abuse, financial exploitation, conspiracy to commit fraud. And you're asking me to issue emergency orders based on a doctor's note and your client's suspicions? Do you have any hard evidence?" Miriam opened her briefcase and pulled out a folder. "Your Honor, Dr. Chen's note is just the beginning. My investigator worked through the night and found several concerning pieces of evidence, including records showing Ms. Hartley's daughter has contacted 6 different physicians asking the same questions. We have phone records showing calls to Gregory Walsh, who specializes in what's called guardianship mills. We also have affidavits supposedly signed by neighbors who now claim they never signed them. And most damning, we have security footage from Ms. Hartley's bank showing Patricia attempting to access her mother's safe deposit box without authorization 3 days ago." The judge's expression shifted, became more focused, and she looked at me for the first time. "Ms. Hartley, do you understand that if I grant these orders, you'll be taking extraordinary legal action against your own daughter? This will likely destroy your relationship and possibly expose her to criminal liability. Is that what you want?" I met her gaze directly, drawing on every ounce of strength. "Your Honor, what I want is to not be declared mentally incompetent by a corrupt doctor I never agreed to see. I want to not have my assets stolen by family I trusted. I want to not be locked in a nursing home against my will. What I want is basic human dignity and the right to control my own life. And if achieving that means Patricia faces consequences, then yes, that's exactly what I want. Judge Murphy studied me for a long moment, weighing factors I couldn't guess. And finally, she nodded and picked up her pen. I'm granting your protective order, freezing all accounts effective immediately. I'm granting your motion for independent psychiatric evaluation by Dr. Linda Tam, one of the most respected geriatric psychiatrists in the state, and I'm placing a flag on any future guardianship petitions requiring them to be assigned to my court, Ms. Foster. I'm also directing you to work with the district attorney's office regarding possible criminal charges, because if even half of what you've presented is true, then Ms. Hartley's daughter has committed several felonies. We left with signed court orders, and Miriam was already on her phone making calls, moving with efficiency, and I felt simultaneously relieved and terrified about what would happen when Patricia discovered what I'd done. The answer came 3 hours later when my phone rang with Patricia's number, and Miriam said, "Don't answer. Let it go to voicemail. We need to hear what she says when she thinks you're not listening." So I watched it ring, and when it stopped, Miriam said, "Wait 30 seconds. She'll call right back." And she was exactly right. 30 seconds later it rang again, and we let it go to voicemail. The notification appeared, and Miriam put it on speaker, and Patricia's voice came through tight with rage. "Mother, I don't know what game you think you're playing, but the bank just called and said our accounts have been frozen. They said there's a court order, and when I asked what this was about, they said I'd need to contact your attorney, so I'm calling to tell you that whatever lies someone has put in your head, you're making a terrible mistake. Thomas and I have done nothing but take care of you since we moved in, and this is how you repay us. By filing false legal claims and treating us like criminals. I want you to call me back immediately so we can straighten this out before you do something you'll regret." The message ended, and Miriam looked at me with raised eyebrows. Notice how she didn't deny anything specific, just jumped straight to victim mode and threats? That's textbook manipulation. Let's listen to the next one, because I guarantee there will be more. She was right. Over the next hour, my phone rang 11 times with 6 more voicemails, each escalating from hurt confusion to outright hostility. And in the 6th message, Patricia's voice had gone cold and hard in a way I'd never heard. "Fine, Mother. If this is how you want it, then we'll play it your way. But I want you to know you've just destroyed this family. You've chosen to believe strangers over your own daughter. And when you're sitting alone in that big empty house with no one who cares about you, remember that you did this, you chose this." Miriam stopped the playback and made notes. "I'm having these transcribed and entered into evidence. They demonstrate consciousness of guilt and emotional manipulation, which strengthens our case considerably. Now let me ask something important. Is there anything in your house, any documents or items of value or sentimental importance that you absolutely need to retrieve before we serve Patricia with the restraining order?" The question made me realize I hadn't thought about my possessions, and I thought about my wedding ring, the photo albums, my grandmother's silver tea set, and I said, "There are things I'd like to have, but I don't know if it's safe to go back." Miriam nodded. "We can arrange for a sheriff's deputy to escort you. It's called a civil standby, where law enforcement accompanies you in situations where there might be conflict. We can do that tomorrow if you make me a list. But Vivian, once you walk into that house with a deputy, any remaining hope of reconciliation will be gone. She'll know you're serious." I thought about this, about walking into my home accompanied by armed officers, and the absurdity threatened to overwhelm me. But then I remembered Patricia's voice in that last message, cold and vindictive, and I knew the daughter I thought I had was either gone or had never existed. "Make the arrangements," I told Miriam. The deputy who arrived the next morning was a young woman named Officer Chen. No relation, she explained with a slight smile, and she had kind eyes but professional demeanor that made me feel simultaneously protected and sad that I needed protecting from my own family. We had a list of items, copies of court orders, and a plan, and as we drove toward Maple Street, I felt like I was heading into battle, except the enemy was supposed to be family, and the battlefield was supposed to be sanctuary. The house looked exactly the same: white paint gleaming, flower beds blooming, porch swing where I'd spent countless evenings, and for a moment, I let myself imagine nothing had changed. But then Officer Chen said, "Are you ready, Ms. Hartley?" And reality crashed back. I used my key to unlock the front door, and the house was silent in an ominous way, and we stepped into the foyer where family photos still lined the walls. And I noticed for the first time how in recent photos, Patricia's smiles never quite reached her eyes, how there was something performative about the way she stood next to me. "Patricia!" I called out, my voice echoing. "It's me! I'm here to get some things!" And there was no response at first. Then I heard footsteps, and Patricia appeared on the landing above, and she'd clearly been crying. Her eyes red and puffy, and hair uncombed, and she looked at me with such genuine confusion and hurt that for a second I almost believed I'd made a mistake. "Mom," she said, voice cracking. "Why is there a police officer in our house? What's happening? I don't understand any of this." And she started down the stairs, but Officer Chen held up a hand. "Ma'am, I need you to stop there and listen carefully. Ms. Hartley has a court order allowing her to retrieve her personal property. I'm here to ensure the process goes smoothly. Do you understand?" And Patricia froze, her expression shifting from confusion to something harder. "Court order," Patricia repeated, and now I could hear anger underneath. "Mom, what have you done? What kind of lies have you been telling people about me?" And she looked past Officer Chen directly at me with eyes suddenly sharp and calculating. And I saw in that moment that this was the real Patricia, not the crying, wounded daughter, but the cold, strategic woman evaluating her options. Miriam stepped forward, introducing herself and handing Patricia a folder including the protective order and restraining order Judge Murphy had signed, and Patricia took the papers with shaking hands and read through them quickly, her face going from red to white. "This says I can't access Mom's bank accounts, can't make any financial decisions, can't even contact her except through an attorney," Patricia said, voice rising and losing controlled grief, sliding into panic. "This says you think I'm trying to steal from you, trying to have you declared incompetent, Mom. How could you believe such horrible things? I'm your daughter. Everything I've done has been to help you." I wanted to respond, but Miriam caught my eye and shook her head slightly, a reminder that anything I said could be used later. So instead, I just said, "I'm here to collect some personal items. I have a list, and then we'll be gone." And I moved past Patricia toward my bedroom. The bedroom looked untouched. Bed made the way I always left it, nightstand with my mystery novel, closet door closed. And for a moment, I felt relief that maybe Patricia hadn't gone through my things. But then I opened my jewelry box and found it empty. Every piece gone, including my wedding ring, the diamond earrings, my grandmother's pearl necklace, all vanished. "Patricia!" I called out, trying to keep my voice steady. "Where's my jewelry? My wedding ring was in this box. Where is it?" And she appeared in the doorway with Officer Chen behind her, and Patricia's face was defiant now, all pretense abandoned. "I sold it," she said flatly. "We needed the money. You weren't wearing any of it anyway. It was just sitting there collecting dust, while Thomas and I struggled to pay bills, so yes, I sold it, and I'd do it again because we're family and family shares resources, or at least that's what you always taught me, wasn't it, Mom? You always said family comes first. Family takes care of each other. So I was just following your advice." The words hit like physical blows, each one carefully chosen to hurt and justify and deflect, and I felt Officer Chen's hand on my shoulder, gentle pressure that was both comfort and warning. Miriam stepped in smoothly, voice professional and cold. "Miss Caldwell, Selling property that doesn't belong to you constitutes theft, and given the value of the items you just admitted to taking, it's felony theft. You've just confessed to a crime in front of a law enforcement officer. I'd strongly suggest you stop talking and contact an attorney immediately." And Patricia's defiant expression faltered as reality sank in. I moved mechanically through the house after that, collecting photo albums from the hall closet, my late husband's watch, some clothes and toiletries, books that held special meaning, and with each item I felt like I was conducting a funeral, mourning not just the loss of jewelry, but the loss of home, safety, belief that family meant something sacred. In the kitchen, I found evidence of how thoroughly Patricia had taken over. The cabinet where I kept important papers had been forced open, lock broken, and inside most documents were gone. My will, insurance policies, property deed, all missing. And when I asked Patricia, she just shrugged and said, "They're somewhere safe, somewhere you can't use them to hurt this family anymore." And the way she said it, like I was the aggressor, made me realize she'd genuinely convinced herself she was the victim. We loaded my belongings into Miriam's car, and as we were leaving, Thomas appeared coming through the front door with grocery bags, and he stopped when he saw the patrol car, and his face went through rapid expressions, confusion, then recognition, then calculation, and he set down the groceries carefully and said, "Well, I guess the gloves are off now, Vivian. I have to say I'm disappointed. I thought we had a good thing going here. You gotta feel needed and useful. We gotta save money on rent. It was win-win. But I suppose you'd rather believe strangers who are probably just trying to get their hands on your money themselves. Lawyers always have an angle, don't they?" Miriam ignored him completely, but something in his tone, the casual way he reduced our relationship to a transaction, made me turn around and face him, and I said, "Thomas, I raised Patricia from the time she was 2 years old. I worked 3 jobs to put her through college. I was there for every birthday and heartbreak and moment she needed someone, and you just called that feeling needed and useful? Like I was some kind of employee performing a service. Do you even understand what family is supposed to mean?" And he laughed, actually laughed and said, "Family is whatever people decide it is, and Patricia decided a long time ago that you were more valuable as an asset than as a mother. I just helped her see it clearly. So if you want to blame someone, blame yourself for making your worth about money instead of love." The words were so twisted, such a perfect inversion of reality, that I couldn't formulate a response, and Officer Chen guided me toward the car saying, "Time to go, Ms. Hartley. You've got what you came for." And as we pulled away, I looked back one last time and saw Patricia and Thomas standing on the porch watching us leave. And they weren't arguing or upset, they were talking with animated gestures, and I realized they were already planning their next move, already strategizing, and the battle I'd hoped to avoid was now inevitable. Back at Willow Haven, Miriam helped me unpack, and when we got to the empty jewelry box I'd brought anyway, some irrational part hoping I'd been wrong, she sat down next to me and said, "I know this feels overwhelming. I know you're grieving not just for what Patricia took, but for the relationship you thought you had. But Vivian, I need you to channel that grief into determination because Patricia and Thomas just made a critical mistake. They admitted to theft in front of a law enforcement officer, and Officer Chen's report is going to be devastating to any defense they try to mount. We have them now, we have evidence and witnesses and a paper trail. And if you can stay strong for just a little while longer, we're going to win this." Dr. Linda Tam's office was nothing like Dr. Chen's clinical room. It was warm and comfortable with soft lighting and furniture that felt more like someone's living room. And Dr. Tam herself was a petite woman in her 50s, with a gentle smile and presence that immediately put me at ease. "Ms. Hartley," she said as I settled into a chair, "I want you to understand what we're doing today. This evaluation has been court-ordered to assess your cognitive function and mental competency. But I work for the truth. Not for any attorney or family member. My job is to determine your actual state of mind and report honestly, So I need you to relax and just be yourself. There are no trick questions. I'm just going to ask about your life, your routines, your decision-making process, and give you some standard cognitive tests. Does that sound reasonable?" I nodded, appreciating her directness, and over the next 3 hours, she walked me through what felt like the most thorough examination of my mind I'd ever experienced. She asked me to remember lists of words and repeat them back, solve simple math problems, explain how I managed finances and made health decisions, describe my daily routine and social connections, and she asked probing questions about my relationship with Patricia. Not judgmentally, but with genuine curiosity about how I'd experienced the recent events. At one point, she asked, "When did you first start to suspect Patricia might not have your best interests at heart?" And I had to think carefully because the truth was complicated. There hadn't been one single moment, but rather a slow accumulation of small discomforts I'd dismissed until Dr. Chen forced me to see the pattern. And I told her about the flowers that stopped coming. About the way Patricia had started talking to me in front of others like I was slightly confused even when I wasn't. About how she'd subtly isolated me from my few remaining friends by always having a reason why I shouldn't attend social gatherings, always framed as concern for my health. Dr. Tam took notes throughout, occasionally stopping for follow-ups, and when we finished, she leaned back and said, "Ms. Hartley, I'm going to be direct because I think you deserve honesty. You are one of the sharpest 73-year-olds I've ever evaluated. Your cognitive function is excellent. Your memory is better than many people half your age. Your decision-making capacity is sound, and you show absolutely no signs of dementia or mental incompetence. In fact, the way you've handled this crisis demonstrates exactly the kind of clear thinking and self-preservation instinct that competent adults possess. So let me be absolutely clear. If anyone tries to have you declared incompetent based on mental decline, they're lying, and I'll testify to that in any court in this country." The relief that washed over me was so intense I felt dizzy, and I realized I'd been carrying a tiny seed of doubt. A fear that maybe Patricia was right, maybe I was declining and just didn't realize it, but Dr. Tam's words demolished that doubt completely. She continued, "However, I do want to talk about something I observed during our session. You have a tendency to second-guess yourself, to question your own perceptions and feelings, especially when it comes to Patricia, and that's not cognitive decline. That's emotional abuse. It's a pattern I see often in elder abuse cases where the victim has been systematically undermined and made to doubt their own judgment. And Vivian, you need to understand that this is what Patricia has been doing to you, probably for longer than you realize. She's been training you to distrust yourself so that when she made her move, you'd be more likely to go along with it rather than fight back." The insight hit hard because it was true. I'd spent months telling myself I was being paranoid, that I was imagining slights, that I was too sensitive, and all of that self-doubt had been carefully planted and cultivated by Patricia's subtle manipulations. And recognizing this pattern didn't just explain the recent crisis. It cast new light on years of our relationship I'd misunderstood. That evening, Miriam received Dr. Tam's preliminary report and called me immediately with barely contained excitement. "Vivian, this report is exactly what we needed. Dr. Tam is recommending that you be found fully competent. She's documenting the emotional abuse patterns, and she's offering to testify if needed, which means any attempt Patricia makes to have you declared incompetent will fail before it even starts. We've effectively blocked her primary strategy." The next development came from a direction I hadn't anticipated. Thomas's gambling debts. Miriam's investigator had been digging into their financial situation, and what he'd uncovered was worse than we'd thought. Thomas owed nearly $200,000 to various casinos and sports betting operations, and some of these debts were held by people who didn't use lawyers to collect. And Patricia had been using my credit cards to make minimum payments on some of these debts, which was how she'd kept Thomas alive, but also how they dug themselves into a hole so deep that my house and savings looked like their only escape route. "This changes everything," Miriam explained over coffee. "Because now we're not just dealing with greedy family members, We're dealing with desperate people who have dangerous creditors breathing down their necks, which means Patricia wasn't planning to have you declared incompetent out of pure malice. She was doing it out of survival, and that makes her more unpredictable, more willing to take risks. We need to be very careful about your security going forward. She arranged for additional safety measures, a security system at Willow Haven, a panic button I could wear around my neck, regular check-ins with Officer Chen, who'd taken personal interest in the case, and I felt simultaneously grateful for the protection and horrified that it was necessary, that my own daughter might pose a physical threat if she became desperate enough. The call came 3 days later. Patricia's attorney, Gregory Walsh, requested a meeting to discuss settlement, and Miriam's immediate response was suspicion because abusers only offered to settle when they knew they were losing. But she agreed to the meeting with the condition that it would be in her office with me present and everything recorded. Gregory Walsh was exactly what I expected. Expensive suit, practice smile, surface charm that felt slimy up close, and he started with what he clearly thought was a winning approach. Ms. Hartley, I want you to know that Patricia loves you very much. This entire situation has been a tragic misunderstanding, fueled by outside influences who don't understand your family dynamics. Patricia has authorized me to propose a very generous settlement that would allow you to maintain your independence, while also ensuring she and Thomas are compensated for the years of care they've provided. Miriam cut him off before he could continue. Let me stop you right there, counselor. Your client hasn't provided care. She's committed theft, fraud, and elder abuse. She's sold property that didn't belong to her. She's taken out credit cards in Ms. Hartley's name without authorization, and she's attempted to manufacture evidence of incompetence. So unless your settlement proposal involves Patricia returning every penny she's stolen and pleading guilty to criminal charges, I'm not interested in hearing it. Walsh's smile didn't falter, but his eyes went cold. I think you're mischaracterizing the situation. My client has documentation showing that Ms. Hartley gave permission for all financial transactions, that she was aware of and approved the sale of jewelry to help family members in need, and that her recent accusations are actually evidence of the very mental decline we've been concerned about. We have 3 neighbors prepared to testify that they've witnessed Ms. Hartley acting confused and disoriented, forgetting conversations, losing items, and accusing family members of theft. I felt my stomach drop because this was exactly what Dr. Chen had warned about: the manufactured evidence, the false witnesses, the systematic construction of a narrative that would paint me as incompetent. And Walsh continued smoothly. So here's what we're proposing. Patricia will agree to move out of the house and cease all contact with Ms. Hartley. In exchange, Ms. Hartley will drop all legal actions, won't pursue criminal charges, and will provide a one-time payment of $500,000 to help Patricia and Thomas start over. That's a substantial sum, but consider it compensation for years of care and also payment for Patricia's silence about certain aspects of Ms. Hartley's recent behavior that might be embarrassing if they became public. The extortion was so blatant, so crude, that I actually laughed, a harsh sound that surprised even me, and I said, "You're threatening to lie about me in public unless I pay you $500,000? You do realize that's a crime? That blackmail is actually illegal." And Walsh had the audacity to look offended. I'm not threatening anything. I'm simply pointing out that litigation is ugly in public, that reputations get damaged, that an elderly woman accusing her daughter of abuse will inevitably lead to counter-accusations, and wouldn't it be better for everyone to avoid that messiness with a clean financial settlement? Miriam stood up, her face flushed with anger. This meeting is over. You can tell your client that we'll see her in court. And counselor, I'd be very careful about those 3 neighbors you mentioned, because if they're lying, they can be prosecuted for perjury, and if you coach them to lie, you can be disbarred. Now get out of my office. After Walsh left, Miriam turned to me and said, "That was actually helpful, because now we know they're desperate. The settlement offer was absurd. No judge would ever approve it, which means they don't actually expect us to accept. They're trying to scare you, to make you think they have more ammunition than they actually do." The deposition was scheduled for the following week, and Miriam spent hours preparing me for what to expect. She explained that Patricia's attorney would try to make me angry, would ask questions designed to confuse or upset me, would look for any inconsistency in my story that could be used to suggest cognitive decline, and she drilled me on staying calm, answering only what was asked, and not volunteering additional information that could be twisted later. The morning of the deposition, I dressed carefully in a navy suit that made me feel professional and competent, and Miriam picked me up early because she wanted time to do a final review. But as we pulled into the parking lot of the building where the deposition would be held, she received a phone call that made her face go white, and she listened for a moment, then said, "We'll be right there," and turned to me with an expression of shock and something that looked almost like vindication. "That was Detective Marcus from the Fraud Division," she said. "They've arrested Thomas. Apparently he tried to withdraw $50,000 from an account he'd opened in your name, an account you never authorized, and when the bank flagged the transaction and called the police, Thomas panicked and tried to run. They caught him in the parking lot with fake identification and forged documents. Vivian, your son-in-law is going to jail." The deposition was postponed while everyone scrambled to deal with this new development, and Gregory Walsh called Miriam twice asking for emergency meetings. And his smooth confidence was gone, replaced by barely concealed panic, because Thomas's arrest wasn't just about fraud. It was evidence of a broader conspiracy that now included Patricia, and the criminal charges that had been theoretical were suddenly very real. We met with Detective Marcus that afternoon, a tired-looking man in his 40s, who'd clearly seen too much human ugliness, and he explained that Thomas had been desperate, that the gambling debts had reached a point where he was receiving threats, and that he'd opened the fake account 3 months ago, planning to slowly transfer money from my legitimate accounts, in amounts small enough not to trigger alerts. But Patricia's plan to have me declared incompetent had disrupted his timeline and forced him to make a large withdrawal that immediately raised red flags. "The thing is," Detective Marcus said, looking at me with something like pity, "Thomas is talking. He's offering to testify against Patricia in exchange for a reduced sentence, and what he's telling us is even worse than we thought. Apparently, Patricia didn't just plan to have you declared incompetent. She had a backup plan if that didn't work. She'd been researching nursing homes in other states, facilities with poor oversight and histories of neglect, and she was planning to move you to one of these places under false pretenses. Tell you, it was a temporary rehabilitation stay after a fake medical emergency. And then, once you were there, she'd work with the facility to keep you sedated and isolated until you died of natural causes, which in these places doesn't take long." The room seemed to tilt around me, and I heard someone making a choking sound and realized it was me, trying to process what I'd just heard, that my daughter hadn't just wanted my money, she'd been willing to essentially murder me, to lock me away in a nightmare facility where I'd be drugged and neglected until my body gave out. And the level of evil required to plan something like that, to look your own mother in the eye while designing her slow death, was beyond anything I could comprehend. Miriam's hand was on my shoulder. Her voice was in my ear saying, "Breathe. Just breathe." And gradually the room stopped spinning and I could focus again. And I looked at Detective Marcus and said, "I want her prosecuted. I want every charge you can possibly bring. I don't care if she's my daughter. I don't care what it costs me emotionally. What she planned to do was attempted murder, and she needs to be held accountable." Detective Marcus nodded grimly. "We're building the case now. Thomas's testimony plus the evidence we've gathered should be enough for multiple felony charges. Elder abuse, fraud, conspiracy, possibly attempted kidnapping depending on how the DA wants to charge the nursing home plan. Ms. Hartley, I know this is devastating, but I want you to know that you did exactly the right thing by listening to Dr. Chen and getting legal help immediately. If you'd waited even a few more weeks, if you'd gone to that appointment with the corrupt doctor, we might not have been able to stop this in time." The trial came swiftly The prosecutor presented overwhelming evidence. Thomas testified against Patricia in exchange for his reduced sentence. And the jury took less than 4 hours to return guilty verdicts on all counts: elder abuse, financial exploitation, conspiracy to commit fraud, and attempted false imprisonment based on the nursing home plan. And Patricia showed no emotion when the verdicts were read. Just sat with her hands folded, staring at nothing, while Gregory Walsh made notes for what I assumed would be an appeal he'd never win. At the sentencing hearing, Patricia was given the opportunity to make a statement, and for the first time since this nightmare began, she spoke directly to me, and her voice was flat and effectless when she said, "I'm sorry you feel I betrayed you. That was never my intention. I only wanted to help secure your future and make sure you were taken care of in your declining years. If my methods were flawed, I apologize. But I want you to know that everything I did came from a place of love, even if you can't see that now." And the apology was so hollow, so devoid of actual accountability, that I felt nothing hearing it. No anger or sadness, just a kind of distant pity for someone so broken they couldn't even recognize their own brokenness. Judge Murphy's response was withering. "Ms. Caldwell, I've presided over many cases in my career, and I've learned to recognize genuine remorse versus self-serving statements designed to reduce sentences. What you just offered was not an apology, it was an attempt to rewrite history and maintain your victim narrative. But this court deals in facts, not fiction, and the facts show that you systematically abused, exploited, and attempted to imprison your own mother for financial gain. You showed no mercy, no consideration for her well-being, and you've shown no genuine remorse today. Therefore, it is the judgment of this court that you be sentenced to 12 years in state prison, with the possibility of parole after serving at least 8 years. This court hopes that you'll use your time in prison to reflect on your actions and develop the capacity for empathy you've shown no evidence of possessing." Patricia was led away without looking at me again, and I watched her disappear through the door that led to holding cells and eventually to prison, and I felt a chapter of my life closing. Not cleanly or neatly, but closing nonetheless. And Miriam stood next to me and said, "How do you feel?" And I thought about it honestly before answering. I feel sad for the daughter I thought I had, the one who existed in my memories and maybe for a few years in reality. And I feel relieved that the woman who tried to destroy me is being held accountable. And I feel grateful that I got a second chance to live life on my own terms. But mostly, I feel tired, bone-deep tired, and ready to stop fighting and start living. I'm 78 now, and I live alone in a small apartment near the university. And some might look at my life and see loneliness, a woman whose only child is in prison, who has no close family, who spends her days teaching classes at the senior center and tending her small garden and reading books in the evening. But I don't see loneliness. I see freedom, the freedom to wake up each morning and make decisions based on what I want rather than what others expect. The freedom to trust the people I choose to let into my life because they've earned that trust through actions rather than claiming it through blood. The freedom to know that everything I own is secure, that no one is plotting to take it from me, that I can grow old with dignity intact. I think about Dr. Chen's note sometimes, that crumpled piece of paper that changed everything, and I keep it in a frame on my bedside table. Not as a memento of trauma, but as a reminder that sometimes salvation comes from unexpected places, from people who barely know you, but who care enough to take risks on your behalf. And I think about how different my life would be if he hadn't written those words, if he'd decided it wasn't his place to interfere, if he'd taken the easier path of staying silent. And I'm grateful every single day that he chose courage over comfort. The lesson I've learned, the one I share with anyone who'll listen, is this: Family is supposed to be sacred, but that sanctity is earned through love and respect and genuine care, not granted automatically by genetics. And when family members violate that sacred trust, when they see you as an asset rather than a person, when they plan your destruction for their benefit, you're not required to maintain the fiction that blood is thicker than water. You're allowed to protect yourself, to walk away, to build a new life with people who actually deserve your love and trust, and there's no shame in choosing to survive. I've built a good life in the aftermath of betrayal. Not the life I expected when Patricia was born, and I imagined decades of shared holidays and grandchildren and the comfortable companionship of mother and daughter growing old together. But a life that's mine, authentic and hard-won, and there's deep satisfaction in that, in knowing that when everything I believed about family was torn away, I didn't crumble. I rebuilt, and the foundation I built this time is stronger, because it's based on truth rather than hope, on boundaries rather than unconditional trust, on chosen relationships rather than assumed ones. Last week, a woman approached me after one of my classes at the senior center, and she was crying as she told me her daughter had just asked her to sign a power of attorney, and all her instincts were screaming that something was wrong, but she felt guilty for doubting her own child. And I took her hands and I said, "Trust your instincts. They're trying to protect you, and guilt is what abusers count on. They know you've been taught that good mothers trust their children, that family means never questioning motives, but that's a lie designed to keep you vulnerable. You are allowed to protect yourself even from your own children, especially from your own children if they're trying to harm you." And I gave her Miriam's number, and I watched her walk away with shoulders a little straighter, with permission to value her own well-being over her daughter's demands. And I thought about how Dr. Chen's courage had rippled out through me to help someone else. And maybe that woman would help someone else in turn, and that's how we survive these betrayals. Not alone, but by building networks of truth-tellers who refuse to pretend that family automatically means safety. If you're watching this and you recognize yourself in my story, if you have family members who make you feel confused or guilty or afraid, if people who claim to love you are asking you to sign things you don't understand or questioning your competence or isolating you from friends, please, please listen to your instincts the way I almost didn't. Reach out to someone you trust, call an elder abuse hotline, contact an attorney who specializes in these cases, because you deserve to live your life with dignity and freedom, regardless of what your family thinks they're entitled to. And remember that protecting yourself isn't selfish or cruel. It's necessary. It's survival. And there's no shame in choosing to survive. I'm Vivian Hartley. I'm 78 years old, and I'm living proof that it's never too late to start over, to build a life based on truth instead of illusions, to surround yourself with people who truly care, rather than people who merely claim to. And while I wouldn't wish my journey on anyone, I'm grateful for where it's brought me. To this quiet apartment, with my books and my tea and my hard-won peace, and to the knowledge that I'm strong enough to protect myself, brave enough to tell the truth, and wise enough to know that some battles are worth fighting, even when the cost is everything you thought you knew about family. Thank you for listening to my story. If it's helped even one person recognize the warning signs or find the courage to act, then sharing it was worth the pain of reliving it. Take care of yourselves. Trust your instincts, and remember that you're never too old to reclaim your life. Now I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Have you or someone you know experienced something similar? And please, if you found this story valuable, like and subscribe so more people can hear these important truths, because elder abuse thrives in silence, and the more we talk about it, the more we can protect each other.